Welcome into another episode of the Prep Extra Podcast. I'm Colton Stone alongside, as always, Chris Basnett. This is going to be one of the last football podcasts of the season.
Maybe the last.
Maybe the last.
Yeah.
And we got here. We finally made it here.
Yep.
And, the semifinals kind of went maybe the way, you look at the matchups, kind of went the way we thought they would. Still a few surprise teams here and there, but, the one thing we've got to hit on, and it's going to be the biggest thing, and it's the first state title game. We said at the very beginning, you can go back, listen to our first episode.
Yep.
Parkview Christian is the best chance for Lincoln to win the state title.
Here they are.
And they've got Pawnee City on Friday.
Yep. Beat SEM in the semifinals. Chandler Page, huge day, 36 carries, went north of 300 yards, 5 touchdowns. Kind of the perfect formula on that day with the wind blowing and how cold it was. And I think that's the deal where we thought Parkview could win that game, maybe would win that game. Chandler Page knocked out early the first time they played, with Parkview leading 16-0 and driving when he went down. So a nice revenge win for Parkview there, first of all. Most importantly, it gets them to the state title game this Friday in Kearney, 7 o'clock, Foster Field at UNK. Come on out. If you got your Friday night free.
That's right.
Watch a little 6-man. Enjoy the Kearney nightlife afterwards. I could point you to all the good spots from my college days. Or maybe not, I don't know. But, it should be a fun game. This is going to be another rematch for Parkview. They played Pawnee City a few weeks ago, won by a few scores. Sounds like Pawnee City's quarterback missed that game with a concussion. He should be back for this game. And, like you said, first time since 2011, Lincoln's got a chance to win a state championship in football. Obviously the first one that's non-8-man. Or non-11-man, excuse me. No 8-man teams in the city, of course, and Parkview the only 6-man team. Last team to win was Lincoln Southeast. I believe they beat Omaha Burke back in 2011. So chance for Parkview to end a long drought here for the city. And, it's a pretty cool deal. You're talking about a school that dropped into 6-man just a few years ago. There were questions about, they had a couple rough years in 8-man prior to that. The numbers were low. It wasn't looking good. This senior class back then only had a few guys out. Now you fast forward to this year, and there's a bunch of guys out in that class. They've got numbers. They've got depth. There's obviously excitement around the program. So this is a pretty cool deal for the Patriots. It's a pretty cool deal for that community. It's going to be a fun one Friday night.
Yeah, you're talking about a school that was 2-6 in 2019 in 8-man. They dropped down. And the past couple of years have kind of just been a bit of a rebuild for them. And now they've got the guys. I mean, you look at their schedule, big lead against SEM, as we've said at the beginning of the year. Chandler Page goes out. They don't lose after that.
Yep.
And they face off again. We get our question answered of, well, what if he played the entire game? Well, here's what happens if he plays the entire game.
Yep.
So that'll be a really interesting matchup. I love 6-man football. So no matter who the two teams were going to be, I would be tuned in. But, it'll be interesting to see what Parkview can do.
You want to give a prediction on this one? Should we do predictions?
I feel like we have to go Parkview just to stand by our take.
I think you're right, yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see what Pawnee City has done. Again, maybe they didn't have their quarterback the first time they played. And they've bowled through. D6.
They've bowled through the tougher half of the bracket, you could argue. Beat Potter Dix, which was everybody's prohibitive favorite in the quarterfinals. Beat Arthur County, who was number 2 all season behind Potter Dix in the semifinals, and now here they are in the finals. So this isn't going to be Parkview in a walkover by any means. I don't think this is going to be a completely different game from the first time these guys played. But we said it from the beginning of the year. Got to stick with Parkview right now, I think.
Yeah, and again, anything can happen. It's November. It's state title games, but I'm excited to see how Parkview does under the lights.
Yep.
So, jumping to Class A, obviously the biggest jump here, but you're talking about two teams that played last year. Obviously, the vacated title. We've got Westside and Gretna playing once again. You have a senior class at Westside that is not missed a state title game.
4 for
Class
4.
A.
Yep.
So you've got to think after last year that they've got one loss on the year, but after last year that they're out. Both teams are out for redemption to an extent, but you've got to think Westside's out to say last year was a fluke and we're here to take the trophy back.
You said it's the rare game where both teams want revenge, right?
Yeah.
Even though Gretna won the game, obviously the title was vacated shortly after that with the ineligible player ruling by the NSAA. and the uproar that whole thing caused. They've been great all year. They've answered every challenge. Same for Westside. They really responded after that loss at North Platte and have played really well. You know, they've been challenged in the first halves of a few games this year, but you look at that semifinal win over Grand Island, and they were really, really good. Really controlled that game from the opening kickoff. So they're in a really good spot right now. And like you said, they're hungry to prove that last year, you know, they want to win the title on the field, which any team does, I think. And you ask any competitor, and yeah, they may be happy that they quote unquote won last year, even though it's not officially in the record book. But you want to do it on the field, and that's what we're going to see. I don't think it's going to be 7-3 like it was last year, but should be a great, great game. One of the more anticipated, I think, title games in any class in a number of years. That one's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we went week by week, and it seemed like we were always on this collision course of it's going to be Westside Gretna. There were a few hiccups here and there, but never really, I mean, obviously never a loss for Gretna. One loss for Westside, but it seemed like they'd go down at halftime, they'd come back out and say, who cares that we were down at halftime, right? And you look on the flip side of Gretna, a big win over Creighton Prep, who wasn't a huge surprise being in the semifinal. But the Junior Jays, I mean, at one point they'd put the ball on the turf 8 times. They only lost it twice, but hard to win ball games when you put the ball on the ground so many times.
You're talking about a prep team that threw a shutout in the first round, held Elkhorn South to 3 points in the quarterfinals, and then you see what Gretna does to them with that offense, even with the fumbles, the turnovers, for that offense to do what it did in those conditions against that defense. It tells you what kind of level Gretna can get to if they're clicking. And Zane Flores is clicking and everything else. We talk about him all the time, but everybody knows it's more than one guy when you're playing football. So this is clearly a very, very good team. And it was I thought both those semifinal wins were just really impressive by both those teams. It kind of showed you where the elite in this class is, and it's the two teams playing in this championship game. Yeah,
and I'd say my lean is Gretna. They've faced, I'd say, a little more adversity throughout the playoffs, so maybe that comes into play. But depending on what Westside can do to slow down Flores and that offense, I mean, it could go either way. For now, I'm saying Dragons, but I could see this going either way.
I lean the Dragons, too. I think it's going to be a classic game. I think it's going to come down to the last couple possessions of the fourth quarter. I don't know that it's going to be, a 48-42 shootout or anything like that, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this thing get into the 30s. I think it's just going to be a lot of fun. I think you have to give Gretna just the slight edge right now.
Looking in Class B, not too big of a surprise. I think you and I were maybe a little high on Scotts Bluff. But they ran into a very good Omaha Gross team on that bottom side of the bracket. And Bennington kind of did what they do all year. They got the weather they like to run the ball. And you look at Waverly holding them to 23 points, a few more than they like to give up. Yeah. But it was always in reach for Waverly, but Bennington just too dominant on the ground.
Yeah, the conditions, I think, played a role in that game. Waverly got down, inside the Bennington 30 2 or 3 times and didn't score. Had the wind at their back in the first quarter and only scored 1 touchdown. And so Waverly had their opportunities. That's what Reed Manstead said after the game. But look, when you're playing Bennington, you have to take advantage of those opportunities. That's just how small the margin for error is against the Badgers. You can't leave points on the field. Omaha Gross, just super impressive. Scotts Bluff, I believe, had 4 turnovers, but Gross led that game the whole way. And they got a pick 6 to seal it there at the end and win by 14. That's 2 really good teams that played a really good game. A lot of credit to the Cougars for going 12-0 this year. Can they be the team now that stops the Bennington streak? You're talking about a Gross team that could be playing in C1 this year with their enrollment, but they chose to opt up because their senior class is so big. I think 25 guys out for football in the senior class, something like that. So got a chance to really finish it off in a special way, but man, Bennington's tough, and they can do it all. They couldn't really throw it the other night. They ran for 300-some yards, and that's just what they do. They're just tough to stop. I'm very interested to see what Gross can do against that team.
Yeah, and that's 300 rushing yards against a good defense.
A really good defense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I would say my pick would be Bennington, given, if the weather turns poor, they've just got the ground game to still move the ball effectively. But yeah, I mean, Gross, if they can pick apart the Bennington defense, Bennington has been in some shootouts, but they've usually been on the positive
Yeah.
side of it. What
Yeah.
would happen if maybe they were on the trailing side of a shootout?
It's going to be interesting if Gross can get that game, late into the third, into the fourth quarter, and kind of push Bennington. We've seen teams push Bennington for a half, not really for a full game yet. If Gross can do that, they're going to have a shot. But you're right. I think the pick is Bennington right now.
Looking in, let's see, I've got C2 here first, but let's go C1 before C2. How about that?
How about that?
Aurora and Pierce, game we wanted to see all season.
Yep.
We didn't know, well, we had a feeling it'd probably be in the state final if they did play each other, but you never know how the seeding might shake out. Both teams just pretty much took care of business on Friday, and now they get the matchup I'm sure both have been looking ahead to.
This is the game that I think could be the 48-42 final. It's the two best offenses in Class C1, two of the best offenses in the state. Pierce certainly qualifies for that with Ben Bramer, 6'4" wide receiver, Husker commit. They can throw it, they can run it, they can do whatever they want to do. They've scored on everybody. Aurora's pretty much done what they want to do. They've scored on everybody. They do it slightly differently, leaning more on the ground game with Carlos Collazo. But yeah, two best teams in the class by quite a wide margin. I'm glad these guys ended up on opposite sides of the bracket so we could get this matchup. I think this game's going to be so much fun. I think you could flip a coin and not go wrong either way with who you pick. I think you have to lean Aurora right now, just from what they've done the last few years, making the finals in B before coming back into C1 this year, just as dominant as they've been. Pierce obviously in the finals for the second year in a row in C1, should be pretty healthy for that game. If this game's a shootout, which I think it might be, it might be one of those games where whoever has the ball last wins. I think it can be that kind of game. Yeah,
I think Aurora wins, but if Pierce, again, similar to Omaha Gross, if Pierce can find their way to have a lead, or maybe they're just down a score, late third, early fourth, I mean, it could go either way.
It's two teams that haven't been pushed, right?
Right.
So if it's a close game, who reacts better in a close game? In the fourth quarter, that could be the key in that one.
All right, moving back to C2. This one, not exactly a matchup I would have looked at the opening bracket and said, okay, this is the team that's going to play. But we also kind of expected Norfolk Catholic to be on that bottom side of the bracket. But they get Hardington Cedar Catholic, who 2 weeks in a row has won very close games, very low-scoring games, and they've kind of showed that they can withstand, in this weather. They can their defense can and put the clamps on everybody.
A lot of credit to Cedar Catholic, who's been battling some injuries really through the whole postseason. You look at the gauntlet they had to run. You have to go on the road, play at Mitchell out west first round. Then you come back, you get unbeaten Malcolm at home, who was just smoking everybody up until that point. You beat them. You get Battle Creek, traditional power. You beat them 6-0 to reach one of those classic. That feels like a game from the 80s, 90s where those were the scores you saw. You beat Malcolm 10-9 in overtime. Beat Cedar. You beat Battle Creek 6-0. Now you're playing a Norfolk Catholic team that you lost to, but you only lost 14-0. This isn't a case where Norfolk Catholic ran away and hid from Cedar Catholic. So Cedar Catholic's not going to be afraid of anything in this game. We know Norfolk Catholic's not going to be afraid of the stage. They're here every year. It seems like they've been dominant all year. They were dominant in the semifinals over Ord. Dominant, against Lincoln Lutheran in the quarterfinals. Number one all year. You have to stay with the team that's been number one all year, but don't be surprised if Cedar Catholic pushes Norfolk Catholic hard in this game.
Yeah, I think it's very possible that, again, you look at the scores, the defense for Cedar Catholic has been the biggest story for them. Can they slow down Norfolk Catholic? If they can't, it could get out of hand early. If they keep it close, who cracks under the pressure is essentially what it'll come down to.
Kind of feels like a team of destiny thing for Cedar Catholic. Again, if that game's close going into the fourth quarter, Cedar Catholic's not going to be uncomfortable in that position.
Looking in D1, we've got Neely Oakdale taking on Clarkson Lee. Not really close games in D1. Bit of I would say it is a shock that these two teams are here. No North Platte St. Pat, no Stanton. Obviously, the 2 seed was out in the second round, Weeping Water, and then Clarkson Lee took care of business there. So you look at Neely Oakdale, they may have the best guy on the field, and it seems like every week they have.
Yeah, Aiden Kuster's just had such a special year. We know the records he's set, the national 8-man record for total yardage, for touchdowns, had 550 yards of offense last week, which is just absurd in any game, much less the state semifinals. Can Clarkson Lee find a way to slow him down? He's on pace to have a 3,000, 2,000 season, 3,000 yards passing, 2,000 yards rushing. He's already over 2,000 rushing, which is just unheard of, you know. And he's doing it on an 80-yard field and doing it in some games where he's not playing the whole game because Neely Oakdale's winning in blowouts. So just unbelievable numbers for him. I'm so glad he gets the stage in this game of playing at Memorial Stadium, of playing on statewide television so the whole state can see him. And Clarkson Lee's going, well, hey, we're pretty good too. You know, they're 11-1, and their one loss was to Cross County on a Hail Mary. You know, and like you said, they took care of Stanton in the semifinals. A really good Stanton team in the semifinals, a top 3 Stanton team in the semifinals, and just really dominated that game and kind of put it away in the second half. Powerful running game. You know, I think it's kind of a clash of styles here a little bit. Clarkson Lee is going to want to punish you on the ground. Neely Oakdale may be able to do a few more things because of who they have at quarterback and the weapons out wide. So really cool, I think, contrast in styles here to see which one can kind of, you know, take over in this game. Yeah,
you mentioned a team of destiny earlier. I think Neely Oakdale may be that team in D1. Again, if they can slow down Kuster, then, you know, it might get a little hairy, but doesn't seem like anyone's really been able to slow them down all year. And, I mean, they took care of business against St. Pat's. It wasn't, you know, I wouldn't say it was a cakewalk necessarily, but at a certain point, you know, they just kept finding the end zone. And it's hard to stop this guy. It just is.
You're talking about a St. Pat's team that was up 56-0 at halftime in the quarterfinals last week on Elmwood Murdoch, and Neely Oakdale had a relatively easy time, like you said, just because they've got the best guy on the field most every night. So, yeah, I think the lean here is Neely Oakdale. I think Clarkson Lee's best chance is to shorten the game, use the ground game. If they can do that, maybe you win one of those high-scoring games. But man, it's going to be tough to stop Aiden Kuster.
And our final in D2, we've got Howells Dodge, a team that
first time in the finals, right? For Howells? Yeah, they don't make it here very often.
You know, maybe we've seen that name a couple of times, and Hitchcock County, who just blew the doors off of Bloomfield. So Howells Dodge took care of Central Valley. We pretty much said all year the Jaguars would be here. Seems like you could pretty much say that preseason of every season. I think the Jaguars will win. Well, here they are again, and, you know, probably a favorable matchup for them, depending on, you know, again, weather could turn poor, but they've just taken care of business every week. Playoffs, regular season, you name it, and they're dominating on the field.
Yeah, it's probably the best 8-man team in the state, regardless of class. They housed Neely Oakdale early in the year, and now look where Neely Oakdale is. We just talked about them, of course. You know, I say they might be the best 8-man team in the state. If they're not, it might be the team they're playing. You know, in Hitchcock, and it's kind of that great unknown for those of us who live in the eastern part of the state. But Hitchcock County's only given up 52 points all season, and 24 of those came in one game against a playoff qualifier in South Loop. They shut out Bloomfield in the semifinals. They shut out Humphrey St. Francis in the first round. And this wasn't a classic Humphrey St. Francis team, but still, that's a tradition-rich program you're talking about. They took care of Elm Creek in the quarterfinals. If they can bring that kind of defense to Memorial Stadium, and look, defense travels. It's the old cliche. Now, Howells Dodge is a different animal, and it's going to be a different level of physicality, a different level of skill, no doubt. But Hitchcock County's defense, I think, can keep them in this game. Is it enough to win the game? I don't think so. It's a big stage, and Howells Dodge has been here so much. You know, how quickly can Hitchcock County kind of settle in, get the feel of the game, get the feel of being in the big stadium, get the feel of what's lining up across from them. That, I think, is going to tell the story. If Howells Dodge is able to score, you know, a touchdown or two early, that might be enough with the way these teams like to play football. So you lean Howells Dodge here, depending on how that Hitchcock County defense, I think, shows up early on.
Yeah, I think, like I said, we've said it all season. I think it's all Jaguars until someone proves it differently. It's much like a couple of the other classes, Aurora, Bennington, you know, Howells Dodge, Norfolk Catholic. These are the teams that at the beginning of the year we said, as long as they don't lose or as long as they don't look bad in a loss, they'll find their way to Memorial Stadium. And that's exactly what they've all done. Again, Hitchcock County, I mean, I'll be the first to say I have not watched a snap of Hitchcock County football. But, you know, now the flip side, of course, if they can jump on Howells Dodge early,
That's right.
if their defense can, like you said, settle in, if their defense can get ahead of themselves rather than, having to play from behind, it could be a completely different story. But until then, I think it's Howells Dodge, and when we're wrong, we'll eat our words
We'll
later.
apologize to the fine people of Trenton, Nebraska.
Exactly. So stay here for all the coverage. We'll have coverage Friday in Kearney for Parkview Christian, Monday and Tuesday for all the classes. And I'm sure you and I will be back to recap at least one more time.
Sure.
And then we'll wipe our hands clean of football and we'll move right into basketball, it seems like.
Basketball games start December 1st, people, 16 days away from when we're filming this, which is crazy to think about. So it's going to be basketball season before you know it. Right now, let's go win some football championships.
That's right. For Chris Basnett, I'm Colton Stone. We will talk to you guys next time on the Prep Extra Podcast.